Hi and welcome to a new episode of the State of the Net podcast. I'm Paolo Valdemarin.
And I'm Ewan Semple.
And we have a new slogan. It's not stay home anymore, but it's stay alert, control the virus and save lives.
Your country needs alerts.
I don't know what you people have to do. This whole fascination with slogans that at least this government has is, I find it peculiar.
Well, it's just this theory just popped into my head as I was about to speak, but it's almost like it's a technique to hold us at arm's length, isn't it? It's almost like going back to the wartime days or, dig for Britain or whatever, and I think a lot of the current politicians are still stuck in that aging empire mindset, and it is fascinating watching them just really not understanding the ramifications of stuff like that. The fact that they launch this, then are patently unclear what it actually means, and don't seem to really realise that we're all talking about this on the net before they've even finished. It's so out of kilter, isn't it? I mean, it's a kind of old-fashioned mindset that just seems weird.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I can see the fascination with the war and keep calm and carry on, but I guess the challenge is that they get challenged about this all the time. And I get it that, you come up with a slogan that is generic enough and you can say whatever you want. I mean, what stay alert means. I mean, it can mean anything. But if you see any interaction of any conversation, really struggle to explain what it is. I mean, on one way, they answer to any question from any journalist with, because, you have to stay alert. But on the other hand, every time anybody trying to scratch and get a little bit deeper, there's nothing. And there are so many other interesting conversations happening all around this that this little slogan really feels stupid.
I've just did pictures of people trying to look like they're staying alert out in the street, just sort of, I don't know, eyes wide open.
I've been checking behind my back through the day. I mean,
just in case the little bugs creep up on you. Yeah,
I don't know what can happen, but I'm alert.
It's funny. We've just had obviously the celebrations for VE Day, and that was bringing back stories about the war. And the local one, there's a big bomb crater near our house, and there's a big hole in the field that I'd always assumed was a bomb crater. And actually, to my satisfaction, God had explained this last weekend, because one of my local farmers here, her dad was in the Dad's Army, and there was a string of 6 bombs dropped on the village and the surrounding area, and that's definitely one of the holes that were left. But it just reminded me of the Dad's Army thing, the whole sort of home guard, protecting their families, and we should have something like that to protect us against COVID.
Yeah, or. I mean, it was actually very interesting how during the war there was all this organization that was there to protect from the imminent German invasion, and for quite some time they were sitting there and waiting. It was all grassroots, locally organized. It was brilliant. So
yeah. I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, people make the comparisons with the war, not least the way that we went through the war with a Conservative government under Churchill, and as soon as it was over, threw them out and put in Labour, who instigated the National Health Service and the welfare state. And
but let's stop drawing comparison between Churchill and the current administration.
No, that I know. As I said that, I winced internally, but it's more the comparison with Keir Starmer and the appearance of what looks like a grown-up opposition, or at least one of them. And I could see that being another swing after this whenever this is over. But I think people's tolerance for the faffing around is going to reduce considerably. Any Conservative government that tries to take apart the NHS is going to struggle in the future. And I think people will hopefully will come out with an appetite for maybe policies that look after each other rather than exacerbate the gaps in society. But maybe I'm just being optimistic.
Yeah, it might happen. Could you feel all my optimism?
I can hear you silently thinking, who's he fucking kidding?
Speaking of optimism, in the last episode we were mentioning the struggles in Italy with the tracing app, and we were saying how they had just decided to go with the Apple and Google approach. I was reading today 2 articles, one written by a security expert, and they were trying to explain why it's much safer to avoid concentrating data in the same place. And it was around, you don't know who might come in the future, and you don't know what they might do with the data. So it might be that today you trust the people, but you don't know what is going to happen in the future, and you need to design something to be future-proof. Well, of course, on the other side, you had an economist saying, and not a security expert, but saying how important it would be that if we were able to collect all the information, it would be much better. And people anyway are already giving all the information to Google and Apple and Facebook and all the others. And I was thinking how difficult this whole thing is for whoever is building those apps. Because, it's already a very hard thing to do. And by the way, in our last episode, we were mentioning how, Germany has just moved from the centralized to the distributed model. And like the day after we recorded our podcast, here in the UK, they announced that they're going to use a centralized model. And then they released it. They started testing the app on one of the small on the Isle of Wight, and now there are rumors that are saying that actually they might go back to the Apple Google option because
it's kind of more complicated. And one of the folks I know of who I follow on Twitter is kind of quite close to it, or he's close to the people who are doing it, and it's just been interesting watching that toing and froing. I mean the original problem was that it failed to pass all sorts of NHS tests for data security and several others, I think. So that threw it back to the drawing board, as it were. So they're still having a go at trying to get that centralised record system to work. But they then had one of the guys in a technical position responsible for it doing a half-decent blog post explaining it, which sort of swung the needle back a little bit. But then almost immediately that came out, there were rumours that they might at some point just give up and go back to the decentralised Apple Google solution. And the friend of mine who was sharing this was saying, if as this sort of relate back to the conversation about slogans, if they had just been communicating better and let the geeks blog about what they're doing and why they're doing it, then they might have got some help. B, they might have had more people on their side. But it's just been a bungled set of communications, and so they've almost shot themselves in the foot again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but what I was saying is how bad I feel for whoever is actually professionally trying to do this. I mean, I did put at least one app through the NHS approval process, and it's a nightmare. Building a piece of software is complicated. Building a piece of software in as fast as you can, because it can make a difference, it's even harder. Having all these clowns dancing around and throwing out announcements and saying something and contrary something, I mean, it's the worst possible environment where you can try to build a decent piece of software. So it's whoever is doing this, I feel for them, because I won't criticize whatever application comes out of this process because it's so hard.
But isn't that sort of true for most of this, that it's just really hard? It's complicated, it's fast moving, we've not done it before. The bureaucracies of all sorts aren't really set up to deal with these, with the stuff we've talked about in previous podcasts. And Up to a point, it's nobody's fault. I mean, there's some real clangers where some very, very odd decisions have been made that, people should be held accountable for. But at the other end of the scale, it's difficult. And I've got a bit weary of people blaming the government all the time, because I'm not sure the opposition, well, certainly previous oppositions wouldn't have done any better.
I think that there is a tendency, and it's not just about blaming the government, it's about blaming in general. I mean, it's just much easier to criticize things online and on social media and on the regular media than saying anything constructive.
Yep.
And it's and it's just so easy. I mean, I guess one of the reasons why I back in the day I stopped blogging and being active on social media is that I realized that a lot of what I was saying was just complaining about shit, and you start thinking, okay, but whoever is doing that, it's doing something that is very often very, very hard. So I mean, what people fuck up all the time, don't we all? There are some moments that are just egregious, but there is a lot of criticism. I mean, I have friends on social media that I struggle following, because it's like, look, what do you know about this? I mean, it's so easy to say, I hate this, I don't like that, and Apple continues to make mistakes with. I mean, I wish I could make mistakes like they do, and every time something doesn't work, you complain, and when stuff does work, then I mean, one example of stuff that does work. Last week, for the first time in my life, I've ordered something on one of those online food restaurant on Deliveroo.
Oh, yeah.
I ordered a pizza from Santa Maria, which is a pizzeria not far from here, which is very, very, very good. But, it's probably 10, 15 minutes walk away from here. I said, I'll order, probably going to get here faster, so you're going to get, by the time you get here, it's hot. I got the pizza. I was holding the box with the pizza and sending a photo back to Monica 9 minutes after clicking the order button.
That's impressive, isn't it?
I mean, in 9 minutes, they made a pizza, somebody went there, picked it up, drove here, and got delivered. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, it won't always be like that. It was probably
it's so easy to take that for granted.
But if you think about it, it's fantastic. It's just amazing how well these things work. But it's not very. I actually did write a blog post about this, but it's not very popular to say, "Oh, I did this; it works."
Well, are we doing it to be popular, Paolo? But it's interesting. It's sort of part of this sort of victim-y thing, isn't it? And victims of technology. And I can tell the story because I'm pretty bloody sure my dad doesn't listen to this podcast, but he was trying to sort out something about his Telegraph crossword on his iPad, and Dad's 90, and things are just getting harder generally, and I can't go down and help, so I'm having to do this on the phone. And he was pretty smart. He'd got enough to uninstall the app and reinstall it, but it was still not doing what he wanted it to do. So I thought, well, we'll just reboot the iPad. So I got him to hold the power button down, and I said, so swipe right, and he said, swipe what? The button. What button? The only button on the screen. And what do you mean swipe right? Well, swipe it in the direction that those little lights are trying really hard to tell you to swipe it. And it's just, you think, gosh, all that effort that all these people put into trying to make interface design idiot-proof, and it's still not enough.
On the other hand, you see how kids manipulate these devices, and it's almost a second nature. So,
isn't it? Yeah. Talking of kids and technology and adapting and things, finally, I'm getting around to watching Westworld with my daughter Molly. You've presumably
I just finished season 3 yesterday.
Don't tell me. No spoilers. But I mean, it's just fabulous. People are right. I should have watched it first time round when the first series came out. But it in spades is just digging into the whole sort of range of topics that we talk about here. The whole thing about consciousness and humanity and technology and how they relate, and it's fascinating. I'm loving it.
Something interesting is that I won't give you any spoiler. I won't be specific, but there is a character at some point.
Careful.
There is a character at some point that is replaced by a host that looks exactly like the character. And so the original character dies, and it's actually killed. I'm not telling you who, and he's killed by a host that looks exactly like him. And this being the last episode of the season, I was thinking, oh, so next year the famous actor playing this character won't be there because it has been replaced by a host. And I thought, yeah, but the same actor is going to be playing the host. But I was completely said, oh, so it's not human anymore. Yeah, it's not him really, right? It's a host.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I was saying to Molly, I was feeling sort of slightly unwell, I don't know, some sort of tummy bug or something. And as I'm watching
that bug, right?
No, not that bug, no. Okay. And I found myself bizarrely almost like thinking of my body as the hosts. It's just this collection of bits and pieces that sometimes work and don't work, and I need to fix them, and it's just this means of carrying this head around. It's quite disconcerting the way it's obviously pressing buttons that I'm interested in, but the way it shifts your perceptions as you're watching it.
Speaking of feeling like hosts, it's something that actually I had been thinking over some time, but it kind of came back recently because I've been spending more time meditating. And when you meditate, you're basically trying to observe your own mind. You're trying to see your thoughts coming and going, And for some time, my visualization in my mind that I have about this is, those utilities that you use on your computer to monitor the applications that are running and reserves. I use a command line tool called Top. You run Top and you see everything that is happening. Right. And I was thinking, that's almost like, meditating, almost like running Top. You're basically, you are one step back and you see these activities coming and going and using more resources. Most of the time, you are in the application. Most of the time, you are using Photoshop, you are using Word, you're using the browser, you're doing these things, you're completely swept away. But every once in a while, you can step back and look, hey, hold on, how much memory is the browser? How much memory is Chrome using? Yeah, let's quit it. And, killing an app is like letting go of a thought. So
it's interesting, isn't it? And how that one application after another that you get so embroiled in is a bit like life, isn't it? And how we think that's reality. And again, in the Westworld thing, you begin to just realise how much of that reality is fabricated by our brains, and the whole thing of memory being the partially remembered, partially understood things that might or might not have happened to you. And out of that, we make all these narratives that we then turn into the politics that we started the podcast with. And it is fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I don't like machine metaphors for the human brain. I think we've been lumbered with that, frankly, for the last 40 or 50 years. But certainly the whole way of making sense of things, and as we aspire to recreate consciousness, this matters more and more, and that lovely duality in Westworld about who are the good guys and who's in control and who's flawed, and who Shakespeare tried to write about this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting. I wasn't really trying to mean that our brain works like a computer. It was just this idea of having layers of consciousness, and you realize.
No, I was about to go down I was about to make the metaphor. It wasn't you that did it. It was me that was about to go along that path, but stopped myself.
But I think that what is interesting is in modern computing is that you have, you keep we keep adding layers and layers between us and the actual hardware. So, you might be very well working in an operating system that is running on the virtual machine that is running on top of another operating system. There are all these layers that basically allow us to manipulate reality in a simpler way instead of having to, deal with hardware, which is, deep and hard to understand. And I think that this is a metaphor to a lot of things. It's also interesting in Westworld, the idea that these memories that kind of are left when they get reset, in essence, are a base for their consciousness. It's a pretty interesting, and you see, as you go through it, it becomes more and more sophisticated. It is very well done. Have you been watching Uploads?
No, I wasn't even aware of it.
It's a TV show on Prime, which is based in a not so distant future, like 2040, something like that, where basically the base story is somebody die. When you die, you get uploaded in this virtual world. The story is not, I think I figured out the whole first season in the first episode, and I keep watching it, and it's pretty much confirming what I thought. So I haven't finished it. I might still be surprised, but so far it's not hugely creative. But the way they describe the future and this virtual reality is actually pretty cool. The way, self-driving cars and how they're used, and advertising and communication and the rich and the poor. You literally have in-app purchases. Once you get to this digital heaven, depends on how rich you are, you have in-app purchases where you need to pay for stuff. And it's not amazingly good in terms of storyline, but I think that the way they're representing the future is pretty good and realistic.
It's interesting how fast there are it's just looking at some of the videos, there's apparently a Boston Dynamics dog on the streets in Singapore warning people to keep their distance from each other, which the video just looks distinctly chilling, having seen Black Mirror. And I saw another one of, I guess, somewhere in the States with delivery bots with their little flashing lights, more than one of them driving around the streets at the moment delivering food. And, how many times have we talked about the way technology gets oversold, and it'll probably take longer than we think. But then I sometimes think maybe it won't. Maybe things will just, continue to accelerate, and it will all happen quicker than we expect.
I think that in most cases, you have the feeling that it happened quicker than you expected once you have it.
Yes.
But on the other hand, if you look back once you have it, you realize that things have been around for quite a while. If you look at, even companies like, Facebook or Google, they have been around for a while. I see reminders of stuff that I was posting on Facebook 12, 13 years ago. And it's a type of thing of saying, okay, it all feels so new and so fresh to some degree, but actually it took a very long time before it became, the ubiquitous thing that now everybody's familiar with. So, I'm sure that there will be a moment where we say, it's amazing how quickly self-driving cars appeared. But then probably we'll look back and say, it was like 15 years ago. Do you remember 10 years ago, the first Teslas that were kind of self-driving? Yeah, who would have thought, right? We did, and we recorded this podcast to tell you, people of the future, that we did. But
our own little time capsule.
But I think the time is highly asymmetrical, and it's amazing how we don't realize how long some things have been around.
Yeah, it was like Doc Searles shared an article that he wrote in 1995. so pre his blog, and it was still so fresh in the sense that a lot of the issues he was talking about are still rumbling around all these years later, and it can sometimes feel frustrating because there's so much prospect of the good side of this becoming manifest, and it just seems to take forever. And again, going back to the start of the podcast and just the attitudes, the legacy attitudes that we're still sort of dragging behind us, and feeling sorry for those coders who are having to try and build things in that environment where the bulk of the people above them just still don't get it. So, as you say, time's relative and goes at very different speeds.
I think that the bottom line is that, it takes time to do things. It takes time to develop. I mean, I registered my first domain name at the end of 1994, so 25 years ago, which, it's a nice chunk of time.
Quarter of a century, yeah.
But on the other hand, in human history, 25 years it's not very long. So yes, it is true we have much faster computer. There has been a huge growth in many things. But if we look, for example, at the processes in writing software, we're still figuring this stuff out as we go along most of the time, because it's a very artisanal process. It's a very human-driven system, and it has only been around for a few dozen years. So yes, things are accelerating because some parts of the technology are accelerating, but the way we adapt to technology and the way we embrace these things and change, it's very slow, because it's not just about your dad not figuring out how to swipe the button. I mean, most people on the street have no idea of the complexity of building the tracing app and how it actually going to work, and how people do that, and how do they design it, how do they make decisions, how do you release it, how hard it is, how many moving parts there are, how many pieces that can break there are. This is not very, everybody uses this technology, but it's not truly understood of the complexity it has. And I don't think that, maybe we will never get to the point where everybody's an expert, but
should
we might get to the point where there is a little bit more understanding of the fact that, okay, it's hard. It's not easy. It's not just kids doing, their thingies on phones.
No, and that's why I was saying I sort of feel for the developers who put so much time and effort in to make it as easy as they can, and it's still hard. And it's the fact that people then get cross about it, rather than just marveling at this incredible thing that they have in their pocket. They get grumpy when it doesn't do what they expect it to immediately, It's
something that I meet founders of companies all the time, and sometimes I help them to build, software or apps or sites or things, using our design and development capabilities, and the teams that we have here and in India. But in order to try to set expectations, every time I meet somebody new, I tell them, if you have Facebook on your phone, you will see that every 2 weeks you get a new version. And if you look at the description of the release, usually is bug fixing.
Yeah.
Now, think about this. Facebook is the largest piece of software that was ever created by humankind in terms of how many people is touching. This is a company that has billions of dollars and thousands of engineers working on this stuff. And still, every 2 weeks, they're putting out another release, and it is bug fixing. Yeah. Now, you're about to start working with, two schmucks in Ealing and a couple of developers in India. I promise you're going to have a lot of bugs, and it's going to take a lot of time to fix them.
Well, not just that, but the whole thing about meeting expectations and
Exactly. The thing is that you download an app written by somebody and you expect it to be as smooth as, stuff that has been created with millions of dollars of budget. And sometimes you actually get some pretty good stuff. But
sometimes it can. Well, sometimes the smaller companies can be more responsive. I mean, sometimes the bigger platforms and companies build their own problems in some respects. They don't talk to each other.
And of course, if you need to support 2 billion users, you have the type of problem that if you're building in usable apps, you don't have. I mean, I do appreciate this, but I still think that there is a distance in terms of appreciating the complexity of what a piece of software is. And so, honestly, I'm never disappointed. I mean, any app, even if I download an app and it doesn't work at all, I'm kind of saying, yeah, I know. It's hard. Maybe they'll get it right next time. It's, and if anything works, it's a miracle. I mean, you have to enjoy that moment because you were able to touch the idea of somebody else through a piece of software. And that is a great thing.
I'm the same. I feel the same. But it's funny because it's sort of a bit like the assumptions made about the data collection apps, and again, listening to relatives talking about Zoom and the stories that went round about Zoom and the security. And there's no doubt that Zoom were sloppy and there was some things that were dodgy. And yes, the servers are hosted in China and blah blah blah. But people take all these little bits of information and turn it into devil incarnate, and won't touch it. Or one of the other relatives was going on about Facebook. Oh, I would never put all my stuff into Facebook because they own all the data. And so you get these little memes, these little bits of information that sort of rattle around. And that must be so frustrating when you're trying to build a platform that works for 2 billion people. It does. Something we should talk about. I didn't think about it. And I sort of posted about this and got almost zero response on Facebook. But I see they've set up their guiding council, or whatever they call it. I can't remember the name, board of some description. Mm-hmm. And really interesting and heartening. I mean, it's a considerable number of people from a really diverse bunch of backgrounds, from the look of it with some real teeth. I mean, I read a piece by one of the people who's involved in it, and it did seem like an incredibly big step for Facebook to have taken and in the right direction as well.
Mm-hmm. I haven't read much. I mean, I've seen the titles. I haven't read much about it.
Yeah, it's worth looking. For those of us those of you who are listening who use Facebook, worth looking into, because I certainly took it as an optimistic move on their part.
They're growing up.
If they could just get them to get rid of those bloody stories at the top of the interface that takes up about a third of my phone screen that I've never ever touched and never intend using.
Oh, don't be like that. Maybe you like them. You should try. The ephemeral idea of. I have a whole bunch of friends that actually use stories a lot, and I guess I see the point of you create something, you don't want it to be around forever. It just
I've seen something passing through there. I think that looks interesting. I can't get back to the bloody thing. I can't find it. And that's actually, that touches on something else we were talking about before we started.
But maybe it's not important. That's not important.
Well, I'll decide. But
seize the moment. You look at the stories. That is the moment. Seize the moment. If you missed it, you missed it.
Don't put it up there in front of my face if it's not important. But the thing about finding stuff, I was telling you before we started about our mutual friend Dave Snowden, who's just catalogued 1,500 books that he has. Mm-hmm. Most of them, a lot of them non-fiction, and some of them frighteningly expensive academic books. But he's rearranged his home bookshelves, which he's got a whole room full of bookshelves. And he's put these all in the right order, and he's catalogued them all, and he's put them up on the web. And as so often, Dave made me feel guilty because I'm too lazy to be bothered doing any of that. But over the years, I've made various attempts. Remember library thing, and then there was there's the online one that Tim, what's his name, runs. I've had various systems, Goodreads, you name it. I've tried them all on that naive assumption that at some point I will be able to and want to get back to a particular bit of information. And I just so rarely, it's all that effort and all that work, and I rarely do it.
I've always found this because I've never been very much about archiving information, saving bits. I mean, I have worked in time with people that basically came to all the work that we did around tagging and aggregation with topics. Many of the people involved are the kind of people who say, "Oh, I want to organize," and they collect lists of bookmarked lists of things to read. It's the people that highlight, sentences in books so they can get back to it, and I find this fascinating. I have never had the inclination of doing that, and I don't. It's not even something that I think, oh, I should do that. I mean, like, no, I won't. I mean, it's never going to happen. So I've always liked the challenge of organizing information and how you can try to manipulate information so that you can make it easily available if you need it. But I've never been an information hoarder, if you want. I don't feel the need to keep it somewhere in order to get back to it, because I know that I won't. I mean, I don't even reread. I don't think I ever read a book twice.
Oh yeah, I've got some books I've read 4 or 5 times, but I don't. It's funny because I've actually just got really nerdy about a thing called Zettelkasten, which is a German word, apparently means a special sort of cabinet that you keep index cards in. Mm-hmm. And there was this, I think he was a sociologist, but a German academic, who was incredibly prolific and produced lots and lots of books, partly off the back of his Zettelkasten. And it was a technique for making notes, but referencing other notes in those notes, and keeping them all very short, and lots of little small notes as you go through and notice things in books or whatever else. And that idea appealed to me, and I thought I spent a couple of hours over the weekend working out how to get a timestamp on the top of my text documents so that each document could be uniquely identified no matter what system I use in the future. And I had great fun for a couple of hours doing it and using scripting and all sorts of stuff. And then I thought, I'm never going to go back and look at any of this. So like you, I gave up. But the instinct was still there to try,
I guess that, if you give me good enough search capabilities, I can probably find that thing again if I need. But on the other hand, there is so little time and so many Wikipedia pages to read that I must say there is one photos I've been looking for, and I know I have it in my photos library. But this is a photo of when I was probably 14, and somebody scanned it and sent it to me, and I imported it, but clearly I didn't. At the time, I didn't change. I usually do it. I usually assign a date so I can actually kind of, and it's a scan, so it has no location information. Yeah. And usually search and photo works pretty well. But in this case, I mean, I remember the photo, but I'm wearing a shirt, a striped shirt. I tried stripes, doesn't work. I have a tiny little cat, but it's too small. It won't be recognizable as a cat by the AI. I mean, the other day I started browsing back in photos, but the problem is I have something like 30,000 photos in my library. So, just paging through them, it's not going to be. And that was a bit of information that I cannot find it. I mean, I have it, but I think I've lost it.
It's funny how much geotagging is one of the most unsung delights of technology these days. The fact that I use it all the time. I just try and remember something or find a picture or remember what I did at a particular time. And I just trawl back through the maps in photos, and there they are. It's fabulous.
I think photos are an amazing way of keeping track of things. What I find interesting is that the advance in search capabilities in photos are, I mean, I find them amazing, and I still meet plenty of people who don't even know they can do it. I mean, there is still people they don't know that you can take your iPhone and search for bicycle and find all photos of bicycles you have.
Well, and you can use Siri for it. I mean, Siri in photographs is fantastic. And somebody posted the other day, you can even say, or actually, this was documents. It was, find me the document about such and such that I was reading yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And it will come back with the one that you were using yesterday, you know. And likewise with photos, you can say, find me the pictures of a beach in May 2013 sort of thing, you know, and it'll just come back immediately. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's good, Paolo. We've managed, after a rocky road, to end up on quite an optimistic note.
Yeah. Try searching your photos with Siri. It works. But most of all,
stay alert.
Exactly.